Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I know it's a little earlier than usual, but our speaker is joining us from Switzerland, so that's why we're meeting at noon. So we have a couple of orders of business before we get going. First, we acknowledge that the Boston Public Library's Central Library stands on land that was once a water-based ecosystem providing sustenance for the indigenous Massachusetts people and is a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. We are committed to land acknowledgements for all locations at which we operate. We reaffirm this commitment to set the context for our planning, deliberations, and public engagement will take place from the spirit of welcome and respect found in our motto, free to all. This program is being recorded, so if you missed something, you'll be able to look at that later. I will be sending a follow-up email to everyone tomorrow that will have a link to the chat transcript, so you'll be able to catch up on all that. I'll also be sending an email with the recording, the link to the recording once it is ready. You can also just keep an eye on the BPL's YouTube channel and the genealogy playlist. That's where it will be posted. So the chat box is open. If you want to say hi and tell us where you're joining us from, please feel free but not obligated to. All chat messages during the presentation and the Q&A period should be related to the topic of the presentation. This includes all questions, comments, and any resources you may want to share. I ask also that you please be respectful of our guest speaker, myself, and all other attendees. We will do our best to make sure we get to all questions during the Q&A period. If we don't get to your question before the program ends, you can send us an email to ask@bpl.org. Our guest speaker today is Clotilde Yap. She's here to talk about one of our more recent genealogy databases, My China Roots. She is the head of global collections at My China Roots, where she researches untapped archives of Chinese communities across the globe. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Clotilde.
Thanks, Jessie. Always a pleasure to join you for your genealogy lectures. And thanks to everybody else for joining us today. So I'll be talking about My China Roots, the genealogy database for people who are interested in tracing their Chinese heritage. I also have Chinese heritage on my father's side. My father is Malaysian Chinese. He is a third generation, so was my great grandfather who came from China and moved to Malaysia. And growing up, I've always been really curious about where we come from and why do we say in our family that we are Chinese, even though we don't speak Chinese or even though we've never lived in China. And these are the things that brought me to My China Roots. And yeah, I'm delighted to share a little bit about what I know and what we can do to help you with your own family history journey. So as Jessie said, please do feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. The other thing that I would like to know, aside from where you're dialing in from, is, what brought you here today? Where are you at in your family history journey? Have you hit any kind of brick wall? Is there a particular thing you're trying to learn about or find out? What are your struggles? We hear from a lot of people who don't necessarily read Chinese, and so they have difficulty accessing certain types of records about their ancestors. Other folks who know that there should be documents about, say, their Chinese American ancestors, but are unable to find such records. Or if you're just here to learn and to see what is possible, then you're in the right place. I'm going to start with a just general introduction to the My China Roots platform, and then I'll go into more detail into how you can use it specifically for your Chinese ancestry research. So for those who are new here, My China Roots is the only genealogy website that is designed and focused solely on people whose ancestors come from China. So we are unique in that we try to gather all kinds of materials of the Chinese diaspora, not just in the US, but also in other parts of the world like Canada, Singapore, Malaysia, also the Caribbean. So we gather different collections that were kept by Chinese communities after they left China, and we try to connect them to records of these same Chinese ancestors in China. So we have a mix of records in English and records in Chinese. Now, rest assured, both are searchable, whether or not you are able to read or search in Chinese. Just a quick note on our Chinese collections that come from China. The majority of those are family tree books, what we also call 族谱 or 家谱. These family tree books are probably the most valuable type of document that you could find if you are tracing your Chinese heritage, because they contain really so many names within a single family. And I'll show you a bit more of what that will look like. Um, so how do you access our resource from the Boston Public Library? You can do so throughout the state of Massachusetts if you have a Boston Public Library card. This also means you have an account that you can use remotely. So essentially, you can visit the Boston Public Library website, navigate to the online resources section, then under the genealogy, biography and genealogy, you will find a link to My China Roots. When you click on that, they'll ask you for your BPL card and password, and that's how you can access it completely free. The other way you can use My China Roots is if you visit the library in person. I just saw very quickly and want to address this, that somebody asked whether we have records from Peru. Currently, we don't have any records from Peru except for a very small collection of Chinese cemeteries from Peru. So we have, I think, pictures from 2 cemeteries in Lima and one in Trujillo, photographed actually mostly by me. Um, but yes, it's just not a region that we have focused very much on so far, but we may still have uh, records from China for people who then ended up in Peru. I should also mention about My China Roots is that if at any point you do get stuck on the database or you don't find the records that you need, we have a separate arm of our organization that specializes in providing customized research services. So if you can't find what you're looking for in the database, you can always contact one of our professional researchers to assist with you one-on-one. Okay, so just for those who are just getting started and are sort of new to genealogy research, the approach is pretty similar to researching other groups, other cultural groups. You want to start with collecting what you know about your own family tree, and that is going to include primarily names and places. Now, in a Chinese context, you might notice that your Chinese ancestors may have used multiple different names, maybe nicknames or maybe different spellings for their own name. And that's because there was no standard way for a long time, and in many countries, to transcribe a name from Chinese into English or Spanish or French. So this is why you end up sometimes with your same ancestor appearing on different records, but using slightly different spelling or a slightly different name. In this case, what I recommend to anyone starting out is, do you know the names in Chinese characters of your ancestors? You could find this as a signature on a document, or you could find it on a tombstone. This is why cemeteries are so important. Or you could find it on letters and private documents that that you might have within your family. Or you could also try to look for them on My China Roots. So Chinese names in Chinese are important because the Chinese characters are much more unique than the English or Spanish spelling. In addition to the name, you want to try and find out where in China your ancestor came from. And that is especially for those people who are trying to learn about the stories of their family before they left China. So what were they doing in China? Who were their relatives? What happened? Are there any records left in China of your family? If you want to answer any of these questions, you're going to need to find the specific village that your ancestors are from. And I don't mean the vague region like Canton or Shanghai, but the very specific hamlet that they're from. In most cases, when a Chinese person said they were from somewhere like Canton, they weren't actually from the city of Guangzhou. They were usually from a little village somewhere in the broader region. Now, the reason it's so important to find your village in a Chinese context is because, unlike in the West, um, China doesn't have a history of the church, for example, keeping records of individuals, such as baptisms and weddings and things like that. And also, civil records are not accessible in China, and for a long time, they were not even kept. So, if you're researching somebody who was living in the 1930s in China, it's quite unlikely that you will find anything like a birth, a marriage, or a death record for them in China. Instead, the types of records that do exist are much more local based, and they are a lot more physical, tangible, and they usually all revolve around the ancestral village. So, in an ancestral village, you might find a house where your ancestors used to live, or living relatives who may still be living in this house, as well as an ancestral graveyard. In my case, for example, when I returned to my ancestral village in Fujian, um, there was a sort of very derelict but still standing a graveyard for the earliest Yap ancestors of my family who had settled in the village. And it's typical for ancestors to be buried in the same area when they belong to the same family. There might also be an ancestral temple that keeps ancestral tablets of deceased ancestors, or commemorative inscriptions that give you a history of the clan and how they arrived in the village. And finally, and possibly most importantly, you might also find a family tree book. Now, these family tree books, as I mentioned before, they can go back hundreds of years into the past. So, again, to use my own family history as an example, when I went back to my village, there was an older gentleman there, a distant cousin of my grandfather, who was in charge of updating the family tree book. So he had been inscribing every single name of every relative living and their forefathers. And in the book, or people of my generation, me and my cousins, were the 23rd generation. That means that he had traced 22 more ancestors with a few gaps, but he had been able to trace our line going back, um, 20 or so generations. So traditionally, the approach or the way to trace your Chinese roots is a little bit winding because you need to know where your village is. You might need to visit it. You might need to read Chinese and speak Chinese. You might need to be able to communicate with locals on the ground. But at My China Roots, what we've done is scanned a whole load of these family tree books and made them searchable through the platform. So all you need to begin is really the name of an ancestor, and that will search across all of our records, specifically a name of an ancestor in Chinese. So I'm going to now show you how you would get to this stage and also show you what other materials we have on My China Roots. Okay. Oh, too fast. Okay. So if you were to log in, and thank you, Jessie, for sharing more specific instructions on how to access the resource. Let's say you log into My China Roots with your BPL card, you will be able to see this page. So this is the home page. If some of you have used other genealogy resources such as Ancestry.com, this might look a bit familiar. Ultimately, we encourage you to just search for a name, any name that you are interested in learning about. So you can input your ancestor name in English or in Chinese. We accept both. Alternatively, if you're looking for something specific, you can also select one of these record categories that you want to take a look at. For example, if you have an ancestor who migrated to the United States during the Chinese exclusion period, then it's likely that there is an exclusion record for them if they needed to enter or leave the country. So you could go straight to these exclusion records. If you're just starting out and you don't really know what might be available, I would start with something quite generic, like a census record or an immigration document. If you know that your ancestor may have traveled back and forth, or if you know that they were living in the United States at a specific time. Now, in the case of, I think it was Lisa who was interested in Peruvian records, you could also, if you just want to get a general sense of what sources and what collections might be available for a place, you can type in the location under the tab Sources. Here I've inputted Peru, clicked Search, and I can see, we actually have a few, not that many, and not indexed. These are just image browsable, so you can flip through them. But we have pictures from a few cemeteries in Lima, as I mentioned, Trujillo, and two Chinese community records, which are kind of commemorative books. Now, for any of these sources or books that you would want to learn about, you can click on them. You can learn about this document, so some brief metadata will be listed here. You can, of course, open the book to flip through the pages, and you can also search for a keyword inside the book. So here it would have to be a keyword in Chinese. And these books typically would list things like lists of names of individuals who may have contributed or donated to this particular Chinese association. Okay, so just going back to my main page. Right. So in most cases, it's more likely that someone will be just starting by researching a name. So I will take a name as an example. Let's say my ancestor was called Bok Sui and Chin. And I know he was born in the late 1880s and he arrived in the US in the 1900s. But I want to see what kind of documents I might find here. So I've typed in his name, I click search, and I haven't added any more filters. This gives me 700 results for Bok Sui Chin. Probably they're not all going to be relevant to Bok Sui Chin. This includes also a lot of sort of fuzzy and partial results. Now, if you do want to narrow down your results, as a way to sort of dive deeper and hone in on specific parts of their life, for example, there are different things you could do. You could use the advanced filters right here. So next to filters, there is an advanced button, which when you click, expands your search form. And here you can even filter by place. You can add a Chinese spelling for a surname. You could add things like gender, birth, death, place, or a migration event. If you know that they arrived a certain year and you want to find the specific record that lists their passenger arrival record, you can input the year here. You could also search for them with a spouse or a child or a relative. Basically, if you use this filter, that will then search for only records that mention both Bok Sui Chin and the spouse or the child that you've inputted. So most of the time, to be honest, I don't really use these in-depth filters unless I'm looking for something really specific. Most of the time, if I'm researching someone, I will start broad, and I recommend you do this too. And then I use these sidebar filters then to see what I've found. So you might be looking at this list of results and you go, maybe I'll start by looking at a census record. This is a good first step anyway, because censuses have a lot of information and they might give you extra clues that you can use later. So let me click on one. So you'll notice that these results under census, they are not exact matches. It says that the person listed in these matches is Bok Chin, not Bok Sui Chin. So the reason that these results are included is because, as I mentioned earlier, Chinese ancestors often used different aliases, or they may have shortened their names, or sometimes their names just got lost in translation because the census official, the census enumerator, or the person at the customs officer at immigration. They didn't really understand their Chinese name, so they just wrote it down however they saw fit. Um, Another thing that happens a lot, um, no, sometimes in the US, but I would say even more in places like Peru and the Caribbean, is that first names and last names get switched when they are translated into English or Spanish. So the reason that this happens is because the tradition in Chinese culture is to always state your surname first. So in the case, of Bok Sui Chin, if he was speaking Chinese and introducing himself, he would say, "My name is Chin Bok Sui." So he would put his surname first and his last name, sorry, put his surname first and his first name last. Now, the problem with that is that a lot of Western, European, American immigration officers wouldn't have known this. So they hear the last bit of the name and they think that that is the surname. So that happened a lot. And you end up with even the following generations who would end up with, for example, Sui as a last name, but actually it's part of their ancestral first name. So that's something else to keep in mind. You always want to try and find your original Chinese surname and the Chinese surname used by your ancestor. So going back to my census record, what might I discover on a page like this? So you'll see we've listed some um, indexed information, including dates, residence, and other information, sometimes about the family. Um, in some cases, the census will even list when the person arrived in the US. And very importantly, it will also list all of the people that the person was living with. So a census, again, is a great resource. I can also click on the original image to take a closer look, just in case something else has not been transcribed. And it's always just good practice to look at the original image of whatever it is you're looking at. Another thing I want to mention about these pages in My China Roots, you'll notice that some of these items are clickable. So for example, the surname Chin is clickable here. If I click on it, it will open a page where I can learn more about the Chin surname. So if this is your surname, uh, as I mentioned earlier, you want to try and find out how you would spell Chin in Chinese. And this is what this tool is for. So Chin in Chinese could actually be several different surnames. If you don't read or write Chinese, you might not be sure which one it is, but you can use certain clues to narrow it down. Maybe you know the meaning of your surname, or maybe you've seen it written before by a relative, or maybe you know the dialect that your family speaks. In which case, using these clues, you can usually narrow it down and identify your correct surname. Chin, I mean, yeah, there are different spellings, but generally it is actually this one. This is one of the most common surnames in all of China and also outside of China for people of Chinese heritage. Now, on this page, I can learn the even more specific origins and history of this particular Qin surname, which is pronounced Chen in Mandarin Chinese. I can read about the legendary origins of the surname. I can see that there are over 600 books for the Qins, 600 family tree books about the Qins on My China Roots. I can also see that a certain number of ancestral locations have been mapped by My China Roots that tell you where the Qins potentially came from. So remember what I said about the importance of an ancestral village. The Qins may have settled in lots of different parts of China, and the key is to find the village for your Qin heritage or your Yap heritage, whatever the surname of the ancestor that you are interested in. So this is why there are so many of these locations. And finally, we show you all of the different ways that this single surname could be spelled and pronounced in different dialects and in different countries. So this is a bit of an educational resources for people who are starting out, and also to show people just how much variation takes place when migration happens because of dialect differences, because of historical reasons, because of the language that is spoken in the new place of arrival. All of this has an impact. Angela asked, is the census up to date? We have the census up to 1940. So we have, I think, 1880, 1900, 1910, 1920, 1930, 1940. Yeah, good question. Okay, so the census is a pretty standard resource. You've probably seen it on other websites. We're not the only ones that let you search for the census. But on My China Roots, you'll be able to access other more uniquely Chinese materials. So let me show you some of those as well. So the first one, and this is specifically for those who have Chinese American ancestors, are the Chinese exclusion records that I also mentioned earlier. So just for a bit of background, while the Exclusion Act was in effect, essentially Chinese people weren't allowed into the US unless they were already native born during the exclusion period, or they were the child of a native born Chinese American person, or there were a few other exceptions, like if they were an active working merchant, or if they were a student, or a missionary and things like that, or the wife of a merchant, then they would have been allowed to stay and live in the US. All others essentially were not allowed. So whenever a Chinese person, even if they were already native born and living in the US their whole lives, if they wanted to leave and return to the country, they needed to basically prove that they were allowed to stay. So they had to submit all kinds of documentation, which is typically what you would find in an exclusion or immigration case file. So we have gathered different indexes from Chinese case files from around the US, from different branches, and they look different. They come in different shapes and sizes, but we have a few matches for Box Wei Chin. So here is one for him in Philadelphia, where he may have been residing at a time. And this case file just contains a few letters about probably his travels, authorization letters. Sometimes you get a little bit more detail. You might find things like an interview between this person and an immigration officer. Let me just scroll down and see if I see anything else. Yeah, there's not much in this particular one. But in others, you might find, okay, so here is another good example of a case file which has a bit more information. It has his Chinese name listed and the name of his wife. And if I click on it, you will see that it has also photographs of him, as well as a signature, and photos of his wife and son. And this letter here is what is it? It's like an affidavit where he basically says, okay, this is who I am, this is my background, these are my family members, I want them to join me in America. Something like this, I'm guessing. And it's wonderful to get photographs, which is quite rare for early ancestors who came to the US. And you'll see the next case file, which is of somebody else, but that is in the same collection, also has something like a photograph plus this sort of application. So this guy was a Chinese merchant applying basically to leave and return to the country. And it is also what is also attached is a copy of his interview with the immigration service, where he just answers a lot of very precise questions about where he's from, how many children he has, who are his parents, who are his siblings, how many times has he left the country. It goes into a lot of detail. So I really recommend, if you do have an ancestor that came during this time, to look for one of these documents. You might not find an immigration case file, but you should be able to find an entry for them in a Chinese exclusion book if they did, travel and enter the country. So because Chinese people were subject to this very specific rule, they were processed separately often. And so you'll find these books of, so this seems to be Bok Sway-chin arriving in 1927. He says he's going to Chicago, which is where he lives. And you'll see him listed alongside lots and lots of other people, lots and lots of other Chinese people who are coming in, and you can see under what class or grounds they are entering. So are they newly arrived? In which case, why are they visiting? Here it says Section 6 Trav for traveler, so they're a tourist, or native, or laborer, or exempt, etc. So, and what paperwork they may have given. Yeah, so these are Chinese exclusion specific materials. Other Chinese collections that you may find interesting are also association and directory records. We don't have heaps of these. We have a few for different parts of the world, so but mostly in the US. And these are great again because they have names usually and addresses, not just in English, but also in Chinese. So if you are struggling to find the Chinese name of your ancestor, I would recommend trying to look for these more Chinese specific materials, such as, yeah, so here is just, I mean, I don't think it's the same person, but just as an example, we have a Sui Chin living in San Francisco. And you'll see this is the main difference between My China Roots and other platforms that you might use to research your ancestors. We always try to transcribe the Chinese name also. And these types of directories are really wonderful because they were actually created by Chinese people to stay in touch and to find businesses within their own group that they wanted to visit or use. So they wanted a Chinese dentist, a Chinese doctor, a Chinese grocery store, a Chinese tailor. So it gives you a really interesting snapshot of the community at the time. Okay, and now the final, more community-based record, which I just want to show you an example of, not necessarily because you must necessarily find this type of record on the database. So I've just now filtered by cemetery records under birth, marriage, and death. But I really just want to encourage you, if you are starting on your genealogy journey, to try and find tombstones of your ancestors. And the reason why is, so I want to show you this match. I mean, we have a small collection of tombstones, again, from different small local Chinese cemeteries that we've partnered with. We also, I saw there was someone who specializes in Southeast Asian Chinese, overseas Chinese research. We also have a few cemeteries from Singapore, including some beautiful tombstones from Bukit Brown Cemetery, and also a few cemeteries from Indonesia. Which look very different from these American tombstones, by the way. But the reason being that tombstones are provide vital clues if you are trying to go that step further and figure out where in China your ancestors may have come from. And so on a typical gravestone like this one, in English, it seems to list, full name, dates, birth, and a village, and dates of birth and death, sorry. But in Chinese, you have an extra piece of information, which is the village. And this we transcribed fully on the record. So you can eventually search for it and try to locate it if you want. Now, in some cases, um, you might not be able to see, or it has not fully been indexed, whatever is written on the tombstone. And I just want to show you a cool tool that you can use on the platform if you happen to be looking at a tombstone and you want to extract the characters, or if you're looking at a document and there's a signature in Chinese and you want to get those characters to then save them, use them, research them, then you can use this text extract button, which shows up whenever you open a document on the platform. When you click this button, you can then click and drag your mouse over any part of the screen that you want transcribed. Then click again the red button, extract selected area, And this will process the Chinese characters that are listed here, which you can then, and this is done so pretty much perfectly, you can then copy paste those characters. You could even get a translation. So this gives you the address of Fuyue Village, Shangguan, Taishan County, Guangdong Province. So I just wanted to show you this briefly. And yeah, this is one of the few kind of overseas clues that you will get that lists a village in so much detail. The other thing that you can do on My China Roots, if you find a record that has a Chinese name, is we will always automatically, so the system will automatically take that Chinese name that is recorded on the document and it will search for it on My China Roots throughout our Chinese language collections, which I haven't showed you yet. So you see the section at the bottom says Find Family Records of Lim Sui Chin. So the name is a bit different than the one we're researching, but I'm just showing you as an example how you would go through the steps. Then it says view 72 potential records of Lim Sui Chin. If I click on this, it will then search for all of the books that mention this specific name. So it's looking for Chin books that have the name Lim Sui inside. Each of these books, so I've got 72 results. Now, each of these is for a specific Chin family, but in a different ancestral place, in a different region, or in a different village. So your goal at this stage would be to try and narrow down exactly the village that Chen Lim Sui was probably from. So you can use these filters on the side to look for a result. So I'm just going to click on Guangdong because that was the place. It was specifically Toishan was the place listed on the tombstone. So I'm going to filter by Toishan in Guangdong. And actually, now it's narrowed it down to 17 books. And the first one seems to be for a Qin family in Toishan specifically. So what happens when I click on, let me see, which one do I want to click on? There are a few actually that I could click on. This one also I could click on. I'll just click on the first one and see what that looks like. Um, This one, I'm not too sure is relevant because it seems it split up the characters. So I'm going to go back to my results and pick another one. I'll take this one, the second one, which shows that there are a lot more matches inside the book for this name. Now, keep in mind at this stage, I haven't typed any Chinese. I don't really know what I'm looking at, but I can see the characters that are highlighted refer to the characters for Lim Sui Chin's name. I can use this pop-up dictionary, which tells me, what each of these characters mean. But I could also still use this extracting tool to get a bigger batch of characters translated. Let me see what it tells me here. The second son married a Mrs. Tan and had Junwei, which I'm guessing is a name of somebody. So even with the tools, even without understanding Chinese, you can use the tools available to translate the material. Now, how do I know if this is a match or not based on, what is on the page? So I can look at the names of the individuals listed side by side. I can look at the name of the person's father or the person's son, and see if those match my family tree. Now, all of these people listed here on this page, I'm just showing you so you get an idea, they are listed as the 16th generation. And this book alone is about 800 pages long. So these are really massive. They contain so many family trees. Now, as a minimum, if this is my same person that I'm researching, Lim Sui Chin, he is the 16th generation, which means I can identify 15 more names in this book. And the way I would do this is I would highlight or grab the names of his father and then search for his father's name in the book. Now, remember, I can always copy paste or type in any kind of keyword that I want to search for in Chinese characters in the search form, and it will run a search within this book. So these books are, again, super powerful, and you can find entire lineages really in one go. Now, just I want to show you again the earlier book that I was looking at, where the characters were a little bit spread out, so it didn't look like the right match. But these ones are display a little bit differently. You can see that they show up as actual trees, and you can see the lines of the relationship. So different books use slightly different formats. Some of them are just lists. It's list upon list upon list of this person married this person, they had 3 sons, and then this son had 2 sons and married this person. So they're quite formulaic, and as a result, somewhat easier to understand and translate. Um, Let me just see if I can show you what some of these books also would show you. I mean, the standard book, sometimes you will find a lot of extra information in these books, right? For example, this particular Chin book in Toisan has photographs of the village itself. And it lists, it has a general introduction, which probably gives you a bit of context about the village and its history and how the Chins arrived here, for example. And this is where the text extractor tool really becomes super helpful, because you can grab a whole paragraph, a whole page, excuse me, and not just get the Chinese characters, but also obtain a very decent translation of huge paragraphs of historical context. So this is just a preface and uses quite flowery language to tell you why people keep genealogies, and what the purpose of them is, and what sages have said about genealogy keeping. Okay, so I've shown you what some of these genealogy books look like. The way to search, if you're looking for a specific person and you have a Chinese name and you can search for their name in Chinese, then you want to navigate to the Zupu's page on My China Route, which is clickable under search. And here you can type a name, a first name, and select a last name. Here you can actually type a last name in English, and oops, sorry, and it will suggest some Chinese characters that might be relevant. But for the first name, you have to use Chinese characters, and you want to use the full text tab in this case. Now, what happens? I mean, sometimes we have patrons who tell us, what if I cannot type in Chinese, but I have a Chinese name, scribbled down on a piece of paper that I want to use? So similar to the image to text extraction tool that I showed you, you could also upload your own document that you want to extract text from, and then use that text to search the database. So how would you do this? Under our resources tab, there is also an image to text item. If you click on it, you'll be prompted to upload a document. So in this case, I'm going to add, let's see, a handwritten, let's say my mom sent me this name that I want to look up on the database. I don't read Chinese, but I know it's the name of my grandfather, right? So I can now use this name. Now, remember what I said about the Chinese surname always listed first. So Chinese names very often are made up of 3 characters. And when written in Chinese, usually the first character is the surname. So I know here that the first character is the surname. I could even get a translation to confirm this. But indeed, it lists Guan as the surname and Guozong as the first name. So I'm going to copy paste this text, then go back to my Zupu search, paste my full name, making sure to keep the last name separate. And now I'm going to click search. It's found one result in my Chinese family tree books. And if I click on it, it will again show me what kind of match has been found. So here's the name. He's listed as the 3rd brother of 5. in this huge family tree, this really wide family tree. And this book is a bit less, but still pretty hefty, 360 pages long, this Guan family book. Okay, so I want to make sure there's enough time for questions, but I think that's concludes my this webinar. So yeah, I would love to hear if you have any specific questions or there's any part maybe I went too fast you want to take a closer look at. I would be happy to show you and talk about it.
Great, thank you, Clotilde. This is
Hmm.
always fascinating to me. Okay, so it looks like we do have something. Let's see.
Yep.
Oh, so Lisa's saying I'm a Yap on my mother's side and I want to explore and possibly expand the genealogy records that we have.
Wow, great. Also a yap. Um, so yeah, it depends what genealogy records you do have. Do you already have your family tree book? If you do not, that would be my next step. Um, if you do have a family tree book, but maybe it only goes back a certain number of generations, that happens sometimes, some villages may not have kept so much of their history, and so they only know the most recent 10 generations. If you want to go even further back in time, I mean, that's already hundreds of years into the past, but then your next step would be to maybe look for one of these big regional Yap family tree books that cover a bigger a bigger region. That will then tell you, okay, the first Yap who even arrived in this gigantic region, he did so in the 10th century and he came from this place. So you can actually also, on My China Roots, you can just browse the Zupus or the family tree books that we have by region and by surname. So I don't know if you're interested in the Yap clan, you can type in Yap first, and you don't even need to select a place. I'm not sure where your family is from. I'm guessing they could also be from Fujian, and you can see all of the Yap books that we have on the database. So it's not that many compared to other surnames, 160, but you can filter then down by the region. Oh, you want Guangdong. Okay, I'm going to click on Guangdong. So we have a few from Guangdong from different parts. Huiyang, so this is probably a Hakka Jiapu. Jiangmen, which is also, no, we don't have a paper copy of this one. We have some from Toisan. So this would be your, your Hakka also. Interesting. Um, yeah, I mean, this is the way I would do it. If you do if you have done extensive research yourself, then I would actually recommend you just email me or email my team at mychinaroots.com and just say, how much you've found so far. I mean, have a look first on the database because maybe there are records relevant to you, but you would need to narrow down, you know, where in Guangdong exactly your Yap clan is from. Um, yeah, good luck. I'm excited to see what you find and how it goes.
Great. So Karen is asking, can you tell us a bit about how this database came about, when it was founded, what the main challenges are, and what areas you plan to expand in?
Oh, wow. Thank you for this lovely question, which we don't get very often. So I guess to give you a bit more context, My China Roots was founded in 2012, and when we started, we were just basically a research company, like detectives for hire. And we actually still offer this service, but we started as a research firm that specialized in helping individuals trace their Chinese ancestry. So we did this on the ground. We have still today a team based in China that is available to be hired for people who want to travel back to their village or who are trying to trace their long lost relatives. And so our researchers, they speak the local languages, they speak Cantonese and Hokkien, and they are able to do work on the ground that a lot of people outside of China would not be able to because they've lost that connection or they don't speak Chinese anymore. And it all started because our founder, Hui Han, he's actually Dutch Indonesian Chinese. He experienced this whole journey himself, some 20 years ago. And he was living in China at the time and started digging into his family history and realized, wow, I'm learning so much, but I'm realizing that there's nobody else that can really help me, like no one that specializes in helping people like me or like us to do this work. And that's how My China Roots was founded. But of course, the type of work that we do is very hands-on. It's very labor intensive. It takes a lot of time and patience and money to hire someone to travel to your little village in Guangdong province, to interview everybody there, to take pictures of temples, to translate a jiapu. It's a lot of work. And so that's why we we started, it was about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I think it was 2019. We came up with this idea of an online platform that would empower people to do some of the work at least themselves. um, so we started with like building a surname database. That was the first thing, so that people could find their surname. Then we built the village database, and slowly we started adding digital collections. We started scanning materials. We partnered with different organizations that had scanned materials to bring it all in one place. I would say the main challenges are, for us, we're a very small organization. We don't necessarily have that many funds to do big scanning projects. And there are so many archives and collections that I would love to scan and index, but it just takes a lot of time and money to do that. The other big challenge is that a lot of people who use our resource, they struggle with the language, they struggle with accessing Chinese materials, even with all of the tools that we have. It's still a big barrier. And a lot of people are so interested in, there are a lot of people that are so interested in researching their ancestors, but they just don't have enough information to find anything. They might not even know the name of their ancestor. And so there's only so much you can do in those cases. Um, so yeah, thank you for this question, Karen. hmm You're muted, Jesse, but I think I have seen,
Sorry,
yeah,
sorry about that.
that's
So
okay.
Lisa's asking if we have genealogy documents like family trees, should we email you to see if they could be part of the database?
Yeah, certainly. If you are happy to share a family tree book with us, then definitely, so long as, I don't know, there's no like privacy sensitive materials that might be in books, like there are no phone numbers that you've scribbled in or something like that. But yes, we would be very happy to get um you know any copies of family tree books if you're willing to donate them to us, and then other people can use them too. That would be really wonderful. I will just share my last screen, which has my email address. If any of you do want to share any materials or have questions, or you want to, you have a very specific question you want to ask and don't want to ask it now, then you can feel free to email me here at clotildiap@mychinaroots.com. Um, I see another question from
Okay,
Karen.
so yes, Karen is asking, how well documented are US cemeteries? I'm starting a research project on Chinese American graves, but don't quite know where to start.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, definitely check out the cemeteries that we have online at My China Roots. Of course, we don't have every single Chinese American cemetery. There are a lot that just haven't been, that have either been destroyed or the records are no longer in existence, or a lot of the graves have been exhumed and the remains shipped back to China, which happened a lot before the 1940s. But I'm actually in touch with a few people who have researched Chinese American cemeteries. If you like, I can put you in touch also. Um, yeah, just different people who are either researching them, trying to preserve them. We were even in touch with a group that was trying to send volunteers out to all kinds of Chinese American cemeteries. I don't know where they're at today or how much they've done, but yeah, I can introduce you to some people. I'm so curious what your research project is about. Maybe you can share whatever findings with us.
That would be
hmm
great. So let's see.
Yeah.
So Lisa is asking, do you have any advice about starting a search if you know your ancestor worked on the railroads? I don't know if there are
Hmm.
records that might exist about where railroad workers specifically, or tips for searching them in like a specific port of entry.
Mm, that's a great question also. I don't know if you're familiar with the Chinese American Railroad Descendants Association, but they don't necessarily have collections, but that might be interesting for you just to connect with other descendants. In terms of specific railroad road records, I've looked into this multiple times, and what is really, really sad is that even though there were kind of work logs that were kept by the railroad companies to keep track of who they employed. In some cases, they just listed the Chinese foreman, like the leader of the group of all of the Chinese workers, and then it would say, and 30 Chinamen. So you end up with, you know that they were there, but you have no idea what their names are, unfortunately. If they were working on the railroads, I would say it's pretty much, yeah, I would say it's pretty certain, unless they came via very funky routes. But I think it would be very likely that they came via San Francisco. Around that time, most people who arrived in the US would have done so via San Francisco. So I would try, yeah, you can try on My China Roots, just put in their name, be flexible with the spellings, maybe try some alternative, slightly different spellings if you don't get the hits that you want immediately. And don't input any dates to start with, just keep it quite broad. Around that time period, also, um, you can't really trust things like birth dates that they may have put on a document later in life. The people who migrated in those days, they didn't actually know what year they were born. So it will be different on different documents. So yeah, just give that a try and see what you get. I would also maybe try to work backwards if you know where this ancestor ended up. If they died in the US, if they spent the latter part of their life in the US, I would start from there and work backwards. Um, cool. Good luck. Again, let us know how it goes. All of these unique like family history journeys. I'm very intrigued where this brings you.
Okay, so we don't have anything else right now. So we have a couple minutes, but so if someone has any last minute questions. If we didn't get to your question, if you think of something later, is you can email Clotilde at the address on the screen. I will also share her email address with you in our follow-up email tomorrow. You can also email us at
Thanks.
ask@bpl.org if you have any questions about how to access China Roots, My China Roots through the BPL, or any other general genealogy questions. Also in our follow-up email, there'll be information about our upcoming genealogy programs. Coming up, we have classes on researching Italian ancestries, on using the MyHeritage database, and we also have a really interesting lecture coming up about social history. So there'll be information about that tomorrow in our follow-up email. So thank you again, Clotilde. It's always lovely to have you. And
Yes.
uh,
Same here. Thank
yes,
you.
so Zila's asking, yes, so this was recorded. You can keep an eye on the genealogy playlist on the BPL's YouTube channel. I will also be sending a link to everyone once it's available, so you'll be able to catch up on that. And the email tomorrow will include a link to the chat transcript. So thank you for everyone for coming. I hope you learned something, and I look forward to seeing you
Hmm.
all again, and we look forward to seeing Clotilde again. Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.